welcome back to another week of Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens, where we go behind the lens and below the line with those movers and shakers, the film and TV makers, the producers, directors, writers, actors, cinematographers, production designers, costume designers, composers, film editors, sound mixers, stunt coordinators, stunt men, authors, you name it. Oh, and let's not forget our VFX gurus. And seeing the latest trailer for Avatar, Fire and Ash, immediately makes me think of more wonderful things from Weta that'll be coming to us in December. But I digress. You know I love to talk, and I talk to them all. And today, I'm very excited for today's Behind the Lens, thanks to a director whom I adore, and have been chatting with for multiple decades, Renny Harlin, who went in, it's always so much fun to talk with Renny, who went in depth with me for The Strangers Chapter 2, and writer-director Matthew Bissonnette, who brings us a film I immediately connected with and love, Death of a Ladies' Man, starring Gabriel Byrne. And trust me, while it's enough to love a film because Gabriel Byrne is in it, there are so many more reasons to love Death of a Ladies' Man. But let's kick things off with Renny Harlin and The Strangers Chapter 2. The Strangers franchise began back in 2008 thanks to writer-director Brian Bertino, who treated us to the tale of James Hoyt and Kristen McKay, who visit an isolated vacation home to enjoy some time together. However, vacation home, cabin in the woods, you know where this is going. They're in for a rude surprise when three masked assailants make their stay a nightmare. No follow-up, no sequels, nothing came. In 2018, my friend director Johannes Roberts, with a script by Brian Bertino and Ben Kitai, rebooted the franchise with The Strangers Pray at Night, starring Bailey Madison, Lewis Pullman, and Christina Hendricks. I know for a fact, and if any of you listened to my interview with Johannes back in 2018 about the film, it was always his intent to do a sequel, but that didn't pan out. And The Strangers' legacy kind of fell apart. That is until last year, 2024, when Renny Harlin stepped into the franchise with what has become a new 3-chapter series. All 3 films shot at the same time over 53 days of principal photography, with a cast led by Madelaine Petsch. Now, as you hear Renny talk, and if you've heard anything he said about The Strangers Chapter 1, Strangers Chapter 2, or the next Chapter 3, shooting everything all at one time would have been great as a movie. But as Renny himself admits, 4.5 hours was too long for one movie, for a franchise like this, for horror like this. So he decided to break it up into 3 films. We got Chapter 1 last year. We now have Chapter 2. Chapter 3 will be next year. In The Strangers Chapter 1, we meet Maya and Rory, whose car breaks down in a creepy and eerie small town, forcing them to spend the night in a remote cabin. Uh-oh. Panic ensues as they are terrorized by 3 masked strangers who strike with no mercy and seemingly no motive. They just want to kill. It was met with much acclaim. So now here we are in 2025, and we have the chilling next chapter of the Strangers franchise with The Strangers Chapter 2. Once directed by Renny, since all 3 of these were shot at the same time, written by Alan R. Cohen and Alan Freedland, who wrote Chapter 1. Madelaine returns as Maya, and joining her are, among others, Gabriel Basso, Emma Horvath, Richard Brake, and who else did we have here? And I lost my note. Oh my, I am so bad. And Pedro Leandro. So, forgive me. This go-round picks up the morning after the final scene of Chapter 1. So, we're going. We find there's no build-up, there's no nothing. This picks up the morning after Chapter 1 ends. We find Maya in a hospital as the sole survivor of the stranger's murdering spree the previous night. But the night's events aren't over, as she must now do everything in her power to survive the continued relentless attacks from the mass killers who show up in the hospital. Electricity gets cut, no cell phone. You get my drift. While reckoning with the ways that these events are transforming her into someone else. You know, this is fight or flight here, folks. Fight, flight, or survive. As we saw in the original 2008 movie, then again in 2018 and 24, the stranger's attacks have been focused in one location, one home. A very violent home invasion. But with The Strangers Chapter 2, we go from one home to an entire town, expanding the terror and violence, and letting Renny Harlin embrace the environment of the town to include forested areas, animals, wild boars, farms, hospitals, not only amping up the tension and action, but fueling the character development of Maya as she fights to survive. I love The Strangers Chapter 2 and the development and broadening of not only the characters of Maya and the strangers themselves, but the visual tonal bandwidth and visual grammar as well. Renny uses all the tools in the toolbox to expand the story, from adding a totally different and beautiful backstory to cinematographer Jose David Montero's more challenging, gorgeous, and textured lighting and lensing, to editor Michelle Harrison's rapier, edge-of-your-seat editing that showcases the ECUs and Dutching of Jose's impressive work, to composer Justin Kane Burnett's impeccable score, which adds tonal elements that connected to Chapter 1, but that are enhanced and expanded to musically embrace the wider scope of the story. It is a beautiful choreographed cinematic dance that Renny has put together here. The Strangers Chapter 2 is all about survival for Maya, using her physicality and real environs to deliver a visceral movie-going experience. And visceral it is indeed. Just wait until you see the wild boar. Boom. I will say no more about that. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to speak with Renny. This time was no different, as we tried to cover as much filmmaking territory about this film as possible in what was a very brief interview. Now, I'm going on a rant here for a second. I must point out, as all of you, my regular listeners know, and readers know, both of you, I dive into the filmmaking process with my directors, filmmakers, artisans, and actors with a depth that you can't cover in 10 minutes. The majority of publicists know that and welcome lengthier interviews for their talent with me. And I know it's something that my readers have been talking about for over 40 years now, because in-depth makes them feel like they were part of the process, that they were there. And that's so important. And I think that helps invest people in film and in learning about film and not just rushing through a 90-minute movie. But as I said, the majority of publicists, welcome lengthier interviews for their talent with me. But this one PR firm in particular that happens to be handling this film does not and won't go beyond 10 minutes, which makes it very difficult. Especially when speaking with someone like Renny, and we've got a history and a backstory. So I apologize in advance for the brevity of this interview. It did not thrill me to only be given 10 minutes and 24 seconds, including a goodbye, to talk about this film, because there's so much to unpack. But even with a brief amount of time, I'm done ranting. But even with a brief amount of time, we dove headfirst into not only the evolution of the franchise, but the challenges, along with Renny's creative freedom in the second chapter. emphasizing the importance of real environments, particularly the forest, and the careful planning to maintain tension without dialogue, because there, obviously, Maya doesn't want to get caught. She doesn't even want to breathe, let alone talk. The masked strangers do not speak. So we go, the opening of the film, for the first 15 plus minutes, there is no dialogue at all. So it's very important from a directorial standpoint to tell your story and keep it moving. Even without dialogue, you've got to maintain that tension somehow, which is where your visuals come into play. Your score comes into play. And Renny breaks down the cinematography, including his use of extreme close-ups and extreme close-ups, for which he and Jose use special macro lenses, and which all helps enhance the visual storytelling. Going into the editing process with Michelle Harrison, Renny discusses its complexity, which required seamless integration of new and original material, because he does something here. He had a cut, then he went back and did what he calls enhancements. Didn't do any reshoots. Did some enhancements with creating a backstory. And then that had to mesh with not only chapter 2, but chapter 1. When you see it, I think you're going to really love it. It's very striking. Similarly, Justin Burnett's score had to expand to match the broader scope of the story, complementing the visuals without overtly signaling tension. The interview, this is insightful, enlightening, and entertaining. So take a listen as Renny Harlin discusses. Hi, Renny.
Hi, Debbie. How are you?
So happy to be chatting with you again. We didn't get to chat for chapter 1. We talked about the bricklayer, and you teased me about what I would see in The Strangers chapter 1, and boy, oh boy, you didn't lie. But now, we got chapter 2, and it's even better than chapter 1.
I'm glad you think like that, because I agree. We were facing a real challenge in the first chapter, having to remake a classic and set up our whole trilogy, and I felt like I was freed from prison when I got into the second one, and really was able to dig deep into the character stories and go into a different kind of an environment and style of filmmaking. So I'm super excited about the second one, and I'm glad you agree that it's improving upon what we did before.
Oh my God. And you and I have spoken so many times over the years about so many of your films. So for me to see this in your work, and especially you mentioned something key about the change in style with chapter 2. You and your cinematographer, Jose David Montero, oh my God, using the environment, taking us out into that forested area, this is spectacular. So I'm curious how you and Jose changed things up with this and incorporated the real environs and the physicality that we now see in chapter 2.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and we really did, and I always thrive in real environments instead of being on a soundstage, whether Cliffhanger or Deep Blue Sea or any of these movies, Long Kiss Goodnight. Shooting in harsh conditions outdoors somewhere, that's my favorite, and we really embraced this, and the landscape where we could spread our canvas. And we planned this stuff very carefully. We shot listed everything in advance and really thought about how we can tell a story where sometimes, probably for half an hour, there's no dialogue at all, and it's all about the visuals and the environment and the characters in it, and trying to keep the sense of dread and tension and fear and claustrophobia and all those things, even if we are outdoors. So we try to plan it very carefully, and And if you feel like it worked, which it really sounds like you're saying that's the best thing I could hear.
Renny, it works so well. I mean, we get a rich, saturated palette. The use of color is spectacular. You've got ECUs in here, those extreme close-ups that are to die for. And you've got many that pop up that have me jumping out of my chair.
Debbie, you're the best, Debbie, because it's like, it really is music to my ears, because you see the things that I'm trying to do. And a lot of people, like, whether they are experts or not, they don't necessarily pay attention to all those things, and that's human. But you really do. And yes, I know that I was doing this. We had special lenses so we could get like really, really close to Madelaine's eyes, and like the sequence in the SUV was actually my brainchild. And I said, like, I've always wanted to do this scene where it's like for 10 minutes we are inside this car and we never leave, and it's a pressure cooker, and it just gets more and more and more and more intense. And that's where you really, you're working with a very limited space, but your angles and shots can tell the story, and then again when you go out in the wilderness and you do the really big shots, and it's a mixture of that. So I love doing that, and I love that you notice.
And that SUV scene truly is, and the fact that Jose moves the camera in closer and closer, and then you've got Michelle's rapier editing. Wow. Oh my God. Good. The way you and Michelle cut the shots. And as he goes in closer and closer to almost macro ECUs.
It is macro. Yeah.
It is macro. Yeah. I mean, just the intensity. And then for Michelle to come in and cut, and just the rapier, that is the word for it. So that you do, when a movement happens out of this silence, you jump, and it will scare the bejeebus out of you.
Great to hear. Thank you.
How challenging was the edit on this one, Renny? Because of the fact we are outdoors, this is more expansive. It's no longer just home invasion. It truly is. It's a whole town invasion, if not more. We've got animals involved in this one. Some beautiful animals, some not so pretty animals. But the editing to hit these beats. And then you have, I guess you're calling them enhancements, which is your backstory. We're getting some backstory here. So how challenging was this edit, working with Michelle, to get all these puzzle pieces to fit?
It was challenging because we knew that, just based on our 53-day shoot that covered all three movies, we knew that we had room for improvement, and there were things that we didn't quite capture the way we wanted just because of the sheer lack of time. And then looking at the response to the first movie, and having the fortune of the movie being successful, which then gave us the opportunity to ask for a little more money from the studio, and being able to go and shoot more stuff. It was a puzzle, and it was a puzzle of figuring out, okay, here is the second movie now cut together. What are the areas where we can improve, and what do we keep from the first one? How do we match to what we did, in the second one originally? How do we match to that? And what are exactly the pieces we need to bridge from here to new material and back to the original material and all that? So it was a puzzle, and really, when you go and it's been a year or something, and you go and you shoot sequences that have to seamlessly fit into the movie, it is a puzzle, and it took a lot of time in the editing room to figure that out.
Well, and something that's very striking here, in giving us some backstory about some characters, without giving away spoilers, you have a distinct visual tonal difference between what is happening and poor Maya out there in the woods, fighting to survive, and then you give us these backstory, these flashback moments that are so beautiful, almost to the point of ethereal with your use of white and the brightness. So I'm curious about your decision to take that visual shift.
It's a really good point, and now I really remember, Debbie, how, like, even when we were talking about the bricklayer, you were just amazing in analyzing the sound and the colors and everything. You're like a real cinephile, and it's amazing to talk with you. One of these days we have to do like a in-depth thing about stuff, because it's so fun to talk with you. But it was definitely a decision. I didn't want to, do something like, okay, let's make the backstory bits black and white, or let's make them sepia toned, or let's make them grainy, or let's make them shaky or something. I wanted them to, on the contrary, I wanted them to be kind of like this, even if it's horrific, but it's in a way this idealized past.
Mm-hmm.
So we use some slow motion and very pretty light and whites and light colors, and like you said, it is kind of ethereal, and I wanted it to have that quality of kind of like the past. The reality is harsh, and the past was more beautiful, even if it was kind of horrific at the same time.
Yeah, that's one of the very striking things, and it catches you off guard. And it really makes you pay more attention when you visually tonally shift that. And I absolutely love it. Now, I know they keep texting me, so I'm almost out of time, but I have to ask you about Justin's score for Chapter 2. I know Justin scored Chapter 1. Justin has scored Chapter 2. What were you looking for musically in this one? Because it feels a little more expansive to encompass this whole idea that we've widened out to the whole town now and a greater area in Maya's fight for survival.
Yeah, absolutely. And where the score for the first movie was very built on just the atmospherics of the house and the situation, and almost sometimes like non-musical, I think that we wanted to, without going into any kind of a traditional classical melodic score, but still make it a little bigger and a little more epic, just based on the visuals, just based on the canvas that we were dealing with. We wanted to expand on it and open it up and make the world seem, I guess epic would be the word. So again, I think he did a great job in keeping the same universe that we created in the first movie, but taking it to another level.
Absolutely, and that's one of the beautiful things that Justin does with this music, and especially since we go 10-15 minutes with no dialogue. So you need something that's also going to help ratchet up the tension without sticking it in your face and saying, ooh, it's going to get scary here. And the music, it never does that. Well, they're going to make us hang up now, Renny. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Debbie.
Next time.
It's been too long.
I know. Hopefully next time we'll get a lot more time together.
Absolutely. I vote for that.
Thanks, Renny. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
And that was director Renny Harlin breaking down The Strangers Chapter 2 while giving us a teensy hint about Chapter 3. The Strangers Chapter 2 is currently in theaters. Go see it on the big screen. It is fantastic. And stay through the credits, because there's a sneak peek into Chapter 3 that had me gobsmacked when I saw it. By the way, as Renny said in this interview with me, we will be setting up a time to do a lengthy sit-down about cinematic, quote-unquote, stuff, as Renny calls it. And I look forward to that. And, of course, when we do, all of you will get to hear it right here on BTL. Now, going from horror and terror to almost the other end of the cinematic spectrum, now let's take a look at Death of a Ladies' Man with writer-director Matthew Bissonette. Described as a lyrical dramedy, Death of a Ladies' Man is poetic, emotionally charged, infused with the music and spirit of Leonard Cohen, and tackling multiple themes that evoke heartbreak, absurdity, and hope. Gabriel Byrne stars as the hard-drinking, twice-divorced Professor Samuel O'Shea, whose life seems to be going in the toilet. First, he starts seeing things: Frankenstein at a bar, strangers breaking into Leonard Cohen songs, conversations with his long-dead father, Ben O'Shea, a waitress with a tiger's head. He chalks it up to stress, but a terminal brain tumor diagnosis sends him reeling into a surreal, darkly funny odyssey through memory, regret, and an unexpected romance in Ireland. Retreating to his family's remote Irish cottage, Samuel tries to write the novel he's always avoided, and instead begins rewriting his own story. Despite some of the themes, or maybe because of some of them for the bulk of the film, I had a smile on my face watching this. Quite possibly because I've known men over the course of my lifetime who were in many ways very much like Gabriel's character of Samuel. So I had touchstones right off the bat. But in terms of the themes that Matt's talking about in the film, we see a father-son, father-daughter, husband-ex-wife, husband and ex-wife number 2 relationships, punctuated by self-doubt, the refusal to growing up or growing old, conversations with his own father, who may or may not be with us. And part of all of that refusing to grow up or grow old often involves drinking copious amounts of alcohol. So, they've got perpetual hangovers and are essentially functioning alcoholics, destroying all of the relationships in their lives. But as Samuel navigates all of that, it brings forth such light and realization, so that by the time we get into the third act of this film, the film takes on a lightness of self that is beautiful and welcoming. It's a wonderful arc. It is a wonderful cinematic arc, and is a wonderful character arc. And then peppered throughout this tale is a brilliant performance by Gabriel Byrne. The Leonard Cohen music, and in this interview with Matt, we talk a lot about the Leonard Cohen music and how he chose which songs he wanted to use. And then there are spectacular, surreal musical numbers. And yes, folks, you really will see an ice hockey team skate ballet on ice. I kid you not. And it's fantastic. Comedically chapterized, the film is beautifully structured into 3 sections of Samuel's adult life, with the Cohen songs and accompanying dance numbers succinctly punctuating each stage, and perhaps even Samuel's renaissance, while stunning visuals, courtesy of cinematographer Jonathan Cliff, immerse us in Samuel's mind and how he sees the world around him and how it sees him. Cliff captures some of the most beautiful and expressive faces. The way he captures faces on film is very akin to George Horrell's black and white portraits back in the golden age of Hollywood, back in the 30s and 40s. There's something about how he captured faces that is the same quality that we get here from Jonathan Cliff, the way he captures faces on film. It's stunning. And each speaks volumes. Showcased in Canada and Ireland, Matt Lyon, editor, he seamlessly goes between the two as Samuel's dark, closed, and stuck world in Canada slowly sobers up and expands into the wide open, bright, green, welcoming spaces of Galway, Ireland. Now, in this exclusive conversation, Matt highlights the themes of father-son, father-daughter relationships, self-doubt, and addiction. And he even states that the story is inspired by some of his personal experiences. Not all. This is not an autobiography, people. And features the surreal musical numbers as a means to depict the internal struggles of a man. Leonard Cohen's songs, including Bird on a Wire and Hallelujah, were carefully selected to enhance the narrative. The film's visual grammar, particularly the use of close-ups versus wide shots, captures the emotional depth of the characters. And we talk a lot about casting, especially Gabriel Byrne and Brian Gleason. Brian Gleason plays Samuel's father, Ben, which adds on authenticity to the portrayal of the complex family dynamics. A bonus in this conversation is the depth Matt goes into on developing the character of Samuel through costume, and Gabriel Byrne's work with costume designer Odette Gadori. Gabriel Byrne's costuming is perfection. Perfection. The minute you see it off the top of your head, you're going to think professor. But then as you look at all the little details, you're going to understand how Samuel is stuck in a life of maybe 40 years earlier. So I can't wait for you to hear this. So take a listen as writer-director Matt Bissonette discusses the wonderful lyrical dramedy, Death of a Ladies. Hello, Matt.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so happy to be speaking with you about Death of a Ladies Man. I so thoroughly enjoyed this film.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It really, despite some of the, or maybe because of some of the themes you're dealing with here, the bulk of the film, I really had a smile on my face watching it. Quite possibly because I have known men over the course of my lifetime, some of which were very much like Gabriel's character of Samuel. I saw a lot in him that I have seen in men over the years that I have known. So that struck a chord with me. But the themes that you're talking about, we see father-son, father-daughter, husband and ex-wife, husband and ex-wife too, and then self-doubt, the refusing to grow old. Because so many men, especially if they think of themselves as party hardy and we go out and we'll drink and we can drink for 24 hours or 48 hours and we're going to be fine. We're just going to have a perpetual hangover and be a functioning alcoholic. But all of that brings such light by the time we get into the third act of this film. And then you pepper this with incredible surreal musical numbers, which are spectacular. Where did you even start to come up with the idea for telling this story, which should be a familiar tale, but you have turned on its head and given fresh eyes to it?
Well, it sounds like you've understood the movie perfectly. So, thank you for all those kind words. You know, it really means a lot. The story comes from a bit from my personal experience. You know, my folks split up when I was a kid, and for a period of time I wasn't that close with my father. I found myself, oddly enough, or strangely enough, or maybe not, a single dad many years later, and raising my own son. And so I wanted to, that was sort of the experience that I wanted to bring to the film. And then sort of I was thinking, it is a kind of familiar story, so how do we do it a little bit differently? And I'm sober. I've been sober for a number of years. Gabriel's sober, and it's something that we kind of wanted to, it's a big sort of part of the film, and it really had to do, I think, with what you're sort of talking about, is the inability to grow up, or the inability to see reality as it changes around you. And I think of a lot of people have observed one thing about, alcoholism is it freezes you in time, and you don't grow over those years. And when it's pulled away, that can be very sort of difficult. So we were sort of thinking about, how do we show this story that people are kind of familiar with? Because, listen, there's a lot of divorces out there. I think as Cohen, observed, it's Father's Day and everybody's wounded. And addiction is a huge problem, that touches probably every family in North America or the world, in some kind of way. Everyone knows someone who's suffering with that particular sort of problem. And we sort of thought of the idea of the visual numbers and the songs as a way to depict that visually, because a lot of these struggles are internal.
Mm-hmm.
A struggle with addiction is internal. A struggle, with self-doubt is internal. But by sort of bringing out these sort of surreal moments, it did two things. It allowed us to sort of show those struggles on screen, and then also sort of chart a person who becomes untethered and begins to get, more and more confused as a certain part of the story kind of goes on. And then, I remember one time we were out in Ireland, and Gabriel came up to me and he sort of said, why are we doing all these musical numbers? And I said to him, and I had felt this very strongly, that I wanted there to be a sense of joy in the movie. Because I think, when you do come out of the shadow of addiction, or you do come out of the shadow of fantasy and you kind of come into reality, that can actually be a really joyful experience. And I wanted people to kind of feel that. I didn't want it just to be about, the darkness of these experiences. And even sometimes when a relationship ends, more joyful things come after, and there's a kind of freedom that the people who were caught in this bad relationship have that they can experience as joy. And I think, the ex-wives can sort of experience, not that they don't love this person, but that it just didn't work, and there's something nice to be not in something that doesn't work and to be in a different kind of place. And I think the same sort of holds true for the relationship with the kids, that, you can have a new relationship. Things can improve, things can get better. And I wanted the film to have that sense, because I think, one thing that cinema is very good at is hope. Mm-hmm. And I am a firm believer in hope. I mean, I'm a believer in two things: reality and hope. And I wanted the film to have both of those elements. Yeah.
Well, I think you definitely succeeded with that, Matt. I just love the musical numbers. Hockey players on ice doing ballet, I am there for that.
Yeah.
That was spectacular. It was very dreamlike, and you could easily see how Samuel could be envisioning that in his drunken stupor, there to watch his son, but then this is what he's imagining, this is what he's seeing, because he's not grasping. He's grasping little pieces of reality. But the musical numbers, the production numbers are just gorgeously shot, beautifully choreographed, and the musical instrumentation with each is just fantastic, which leads to a big question. How did you pick the Leonard Cohen songs that you used in this film? You got plenty to pick from.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Some of them, when I was writing it, I knew that these would be the songs we would use. And I knew we would use Bird on the Wire in that dance sequence, just because it's such an iconic song for him, and it's such an iconic Canadian song that I thought it would be sort of funny to have it play as the national anthem. I just thought there was something about that was very kind of interesting and funny. Other ones, I thought there was a song that we would use, and then we would sort of, obviously the choreographed dance numbers, we knew it had to be the specific song. Mm-hmm. So we listened to a bunch of them. We kind of would think about, what do we want to convey here? So one is what's this song about? And then also just, what's its tempo? When we started off, because it's the first one with Bird on the Wire, we kind of wanted to ease into it. And I think as we sort of moved along, we started to use songs that were had a bit more, not just a quicker tempo. Just so you sort of had that kind of, feeling conveyed. So those are the kinds of things we were thinking about and then also just honestly, which songs do we like? And we wanted some to be kind of, very recognizable, and then we wanted some to be a little more obscure and to sort of be a bit more of a deep cut, just to kind of keep it interesting. And then, obviously we use Hallelujah in the film, and we sort of set out not to. But that particular sequence, I had a different song in mind. We used it in the editing room. It didn't seem quite right. We tried a bunch of different songs, and eventually one of the producers said to me, why don't you just try Hallelujah here. I know it seems a bit on the nose, but maybe that's interesting. And as we used it, that sort of, I kind of found, I love the song, but I also found there's sort of a kind of interesting, kind of funny component to it, using it, this most archetypal song at this sort of very archetypal moment in the movie. So, a lot of it was planned, and then some was trial and error, as life often is.
Well, I think the song selections are absolutely beautiful, and I like the progression of energy that we get as we move through the film and the 3 chapters, and the music has a lot to do with that. As does, I'm curious, because you also have score underneath the song, the individual needle drops. So I'm curious about your selection of Stephen Rennicks as your composer to come up with a score that would like tie everything together. The whole idea, the Irish background, the Irish themes, which, by the way, I absolutely love your location in Ireland. But I'm curious how you worked Stephen Rennick's score into this film and what you were looking for there.
Yeah, I mean, he had done a movie called Frank that I really liked a lot, and I really liked they had blended music and score in that film. And Stephen, I think, came from a band background, and I sort of played in bands when I was a kid. And on my earlier movies, I worked with Mac McCon from Superchunk and Portastatic. So I kind of gravitate towards composers that have a kind of band background, because I'm also very much a song guy, and so there's something about that I kind of feel I do use a lot of songs in my movies. And I guess at some level, I kind of feel like they'll kind of understand that because they're songwriters as well as composers, and they can kind of understand how to blend those kinds of things. And I think, listen, Stephen, we met in Ireland. We went for a walk along the canals, talked for an hour or two, and then I came back to Montreal. I edited the film, started sending him cuts, and just from our conversation, and about movies and about sort of scores we liked and bands we liked, and just also about life and whatever addiction, everyone's got an addiction story, so we talked about those kinds of things. He just had an understanding of the material, and he went out and wrote these kind of beautiful pieces to join it all together. And again, I send him a note or two, but I kind of been fortunate. I've been fortunate with actors I've been sort of so lucky to work with, and I've also been fortunate just to work with musicians and songwriters and composers that just work at a very high level, and you don't really have to tell them that much. They kind of understand the job at hand, and they just execute so well. So it's just lucky.
I love the musical component of this film, Matt. It really is wonderful. But something else is very wonderful here. Your visual grammar, your visual tonal bandwidth, and the grammar that you and your DP, Jonathan Cliff, developed here. Faces. He does such a beautiful job capturing faces. And particularly with Gabriel Byrne, as he's going through these different stages of these different chapters that we're looking at here. I love how the two of you capture faces, and especially Gabriel's. What were you looking for to create a visual grammar here?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of a student of the old Chaplin saying that life is a drama, a tragedy in close up, and a comedy in a wide. And I think that's sort of one thing we're very conscious of in the film is, in some ways, there's a kind of simplicity to it. If you listen to the story, is like when the character is experiencing some sort of emotional thing, you just want to be as close to them as you can, and allow them to do what they're doing, and just kind of be as kind of honest as you can in photographing that. And then in sort of the, like we call the more joyful or the more comedic moments, you do want to be wide, and you want to allow those things to kind of play out and stretch their legs, as it were. So, in terms of the actors, again, sort of in the same way I've been lucky to work with really great musicians, I've just been lucky to work with really great actors. And they have done all the work. So when they show up on the day, they're going to deliver, and you just want to be there to be able to record it. And obviously, Johnny and I have, certain things that we like visually, and we watched a movie or two, but mostly just talked about that and some photographers that we kind of admire or that we kind of like, we respond to their work. And you're just trying to, photograph it in a way that's meaningful to you. I think that's sort of a thing that I believe in filmmaking, is that if you gravitate, just stay with the things that you like and that you're interested in, that's going to translate overall into the movie. I mean, I think you need to really care and be passionate about all the aspects. And, we really care about photography, so we want them to be photographed in a certain way, as long as we're kind of, capturing what the actors are doing, because that's 95% of what we're doing is, is what they're doing.
Yeah, the visuals tell a story. And I love the grammar that you developed for this. And your Ireland shoot, wow. Talk about some spectacular vistas there. I want to go. I want to go.
Oh, listen. Yeah, Galway, Ireland's beautiful in general, but the West Coast is really quite special.
Oh, my.
I didn't know it that well when I went, and we had gone there in November and spent a week and looked around and just sort of drove around to various towns. And it was a nice time to be there because there aren't that many people. And then we went back in June to shoot, and it's just, it's really, really beautiful out there. It's also quite remote. So it's really, it's a special place. And it was, and the crew was amazing. So it was just, so fun to kind of get to know them and work with them. So that was,
Well, I love the metaphor that you create, shooting in Ireland with the camera work, with your visuals, because so much of it, it's wide, it's very freeing, it's very opening, it's very akin to Samuel, and where he's opening his mind, he's coming to acceptance, and he's sobering up. So, so the world is getting bigger for him. You've got so much visual metaphor here that is just joyous to see. And then you punctuate Ireland with the snow scene, which that's all I'm going to say about it. I don't want to tip them off, but it is exquisite. Exquisite.
Well, everyone likes so.
Yeah, we don't want to ruin that because it will take your breath away when you see it. It is that beautiful. Now, your casting here is so key. You've got Gabriel, but this is a film where I can honestly say it's a contemporary film, but the costume department is key in creating the character of Samuel. I got to tell you, what Odette came up with the jewelry, with the heavy, clunky silver rings on 3 or 4 fingers on each hand, and ascots, and then scarves on top of silk ascots. What were you looking for to define Samuel through his wardrobe? Because I got to tell you, immediately it jumped out at me that he was stuck back in the 60s or maybe the 70s and had those Hugh Hefner kind of inspired, publicity photos in his mind, thinking that's the cool way to look. Because it's fantastic and it tells us so much about the character of Samuel.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, that was Gabriel and Odette together. I mean, they had talked on the phone before Gabriel showed up. And I think that he had this idea, which you're really, really hitting on, of a kind of Keith Richards-y type of thing. Mm-hmm. And then that someone from the 60s, from the 70s, like of, Sam and Gabriel's generation, but who was also kind of frozen in that time and sort of frozen in this kind of, youthful 70s type of thing, and then just carried on with it. So they kind of crafted that whole look, and she's amazing, and she just did, such a great job. I think she had similar ideas, but then listening to Gabriel and working out together, and they, to be honest with you, crafted that completely without I was out running around looking at locations, and I'd come in and just go, wow, this is, and again, like if you read the script, none of that's in the direction. There's nothing that says, how he dresses or how he looks. You know, I maybe said one line sort of as, you know, like whatever, a kind of bon vivant or something. And then from that, one or two little lines that you write in a log line or, you know, a slug line, they come up with this entire character. And that's sort of the beauty of cinema as a collaborative art form, that you think of a character and you have this idea of a person, then other people flesh it out and bring it to life. And it's really kind of one of the sort of wonderful things about working in this medium.
Oh, but
to be able to work with people at their level. So that's sort of, yeah.
I mean, that costuming for Samuel, just absolute perfection. And I'm sure if I read the script with no indication of a look or anything, the first thing, okay, he's a poetry professor. You've got to have the professorial look with the jacket. Either you're going to go with like a corduroy with suede patches on the elbows, or you're going to have a tweed or something. But that's about as far as you're going to get. So between Gabriel and Odette, boy, they just knock it out of the park with creating the persona of Sam through his costume.
Yeah.
Just wonderful.
Yeah. You see him, the first moment you see him, you're like, oh, I understand this person.
Yeah.
I know. And I think that's, you know, listen, you can judge books by their covers.
Yeah.
I think we all know that. I think we're all aware of that.
You certainly can. Well, I would be remiss not to ask you about the casting process. Once you get Gabriel and you're building this, I have to commend you on bringing in Brian Gleason to play his father, Ben. And, of course, Antoine Olivier Pilon as his son, Leighton, is wonderful. Yeah. Their chemistry, I don't know which chemistry I like more. Gabriel and Brian working together as father-son, or Gabriel and Antoine working together as father-son. Just amazing casting.
You know, yeah, listen, Gabriel was the first person that came on, and we had met in New York about 2 or 3 years before the film got shot, and you know, he'd read the script and we talked about it and had a good, 2 or 3 hour discussion about, the film, but also about life and addiction and, divorce and all these kinds of things. And so once he came on, we had a sort of sense of, once you have that key person, you then start to think about, who can all the other actors be? And I'm a big cinema fan. I watch a lot of movies, and they were all people that I had seen be so good. And so then, once you sort of see someone be that good, you're like, well, wouldn't it be so wonderful to have them in one of our films? And luckily enough, as we kind of went down, whether it was Suzanne or Brienne or Antoine or Carole, they all sort of said yes. And we were just super fortunate in that way. Yeah, and I think it is very interesting because the relationship between Gabriel and Brienne is very different than the relationship between Gabriel and Antoine. And they were able to craft these sort of very distinct kind of relationships that moved in different kinds of ways. But I think all those three guys, and I know this from talking about them, have thought a lot about, a relationship between a father and a son, as I think, most fathers and most sons do. And they were able to kind of take their personal experience and then fuse it into the characters and just kind of create these dynamics that, again, I wrote something on a page, but what they kind of bring to it is at another level entirely. So that's just the luck of being able to work with, people that are very, very good at what they do.
And of course, the father-son dynamics are totally different than how we see Samuel interact with his daughter. There's always a special dynamic between fathers and daughters. And this is a very interesting one that unfolds here in Death of a Ladies' Man. Was there something particular that spoke to you in creating this relationship that Carole and Gabriel then just ran with?
Yeah, I mean, I have a daughter now, but when we made the movie, she would have only been 2. So it was definitely, I had those sort of feelings of how, a father would sort of feel for a daughter. But having, I've got a lot of really close friends that are women and I grew up with, and I could sort of see some of their relationships with their fathers. And that's sort of probably what I was thinking about. I mean, I think when you're thinking about relationships and characters, a lot of times you kind of want to I at least drawn something I've seen that seems real, and then sort of fit it into, a narrative and some characters. So that's sort of I had a sort of feeling for how that relationship should be, but then of course Gabriel and Carol brought their own sort of special magic to it and kind of elevated it, because a lot of that kind of stuff, there's words on the page, and then there's the way actors look at each other or don't look at each other, or play off each other, which really brings the whole thing together. And I think there's a number of scenes, particularly the scene with the tiger lady, that the conversation that they have after, I think in one scene in a way sets up a lifetime between the two of them.
I have to say that the tiger lady had scene, I just love the look on Carell's face when she goes, "Dad, are you okay?" And you don't normally expect the child to ask a parent if they're okay, even when they're adults. But the looks on both their faces that Jonathan captured, just priceless. But immediately when she asked her father, you get a deeper understanding of this relationship that they have, and it's at a precipice itself. All the Samuels relationships are at a precipice in this film. And you really deliver on that. You deliver on it, and you bring us to an ultimate conclusion that is priceless. Absolutely priceless, Matt. This is just an incredible movie. So thoughtful, so profound, entertaining. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, but it touches the heart from beginning to end. So well done, Matt.
Well, thank you very much for those very kind words. I really, I do appreciate it. So, yeah.
And
you seem to have understood the film perfectly. So,
I'm glad. That makes me happy when I see the director's vision, and they have achieved what they wanted. Matt, I can't thank you enough for taking time to talk with me today about Death of a Ladies' Man. Wonderful job, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, there's a couple of things that we have on the go, so hopefully we'll be talking again sooner than later.
I certainly hope so. Thank you, Matt. Go have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks much.
And that is all the time we have today. Check out The Strangers Chapter 2 and Death of a Ladies' Man. Both are now in theaters. Next week, you're going to hear from Devin Montgomery talking about his debut narrative feature directorial, Monsters Within, and the incredible Lisa Brenner, who adds writer and producer to her already lengthy acting resume with One Big Happy Family, which is also dedicated to the late Linda Lavin, whose performance is not to be missed in this film. So, until then, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.